Hello everybody and welcome to Books We Like. My name is Isaac and today I'm going to be going over some books that I read recently. And by recently I mean every book I've read this year so far. So this is essentially my wrap-up for January and February. So I've read 8 books so far this year, so without further ado, let's get into them. The first book I read in January was Doctor Who Deadly Reunion by Terrance Dicks and Barry Letts. So this is another third Doctor book, obviously, and this is set over 2 timelines. The first is just after World War II, and it follows Alistair Lethbridge-Stewart, before he was the Brigadier, in his military career in Greece. And in Greece, Alistair encounters Greek gods and falls in love. And the second timeline is set in the present day, or rather the 70s, and it follows the Doctor and Jo as they investigate strange deaths with seemingly no cause. So I have very mixed feelings about this book, and I ended up giving it 2.25 stars. I came very close to DNFing this book. I thought the beginning was just awful. Alistair doesn't feel anything like himself. The side characters are all really boring. There are loads of really pointless side characters and really pointless scenes. The prose is really difficult to read. I kept having to go back and reread it because I hadn't absorbed anything. And it's filled with loads of military and navy babble that us civilians just cannot understand, and all of it is irrelevant anyway, so it has no point being in the story. And Alistair falls in love over the course of 2 pages after a long walk on the beach, after only meeting this woman twice. What? And it just fundamentally misunderstands the Greek gods as well, so there's that. But the plot is mildly entertaining. The Doctor and Jo are written really well and really feel like themselves. And since this is the first book with Jo in it that I've read, that was really good. But this book has no right to be as bad as it is. It is written by 2 absolute titans of Doctor Who, like Terrance Dicks and Barry Letts are some of the most influential figures in the show's history. It's a backstory for the Brigadier, and it features Greek gods. So how is this not the best Doctor Who book ever written? How is it the worst so far? It doesn't make any sense. So after that I read Wildcard by Marie Lu, and this is the sequel to Warcross. So I have a lot of unread sequels on my shelves, and I decided that this year I wanted to get round to reading some of them. So I've been choosing them via random number generator, and this was the first one that came up. So I read Warcross when it first came out, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars and I really enjoyed it. But I heard a lot of horror stories about how people thought this one was really disappointing compared to the first. So I didn't have high expectations going in. But I ended up really enjoying it. It's definitely not as good as Warcross. I did intend to give it 5 stars at first, but the last, I don't know, quarter of the book really isn't the way I wanted it to end. So yeah, I thought the climax was the weakest part of this series, which is a bit disappointing, but this has some really great character development for the main characters and even the side characters, especially Tremaine. He gets a lot of great development in this. It introduces some really cool new characters as well. And the plot is really complex and intriguing. And I was really disturbed at first about the implications of what was going on. Because if you know how Warcross ended, you probably know what this book is about. But it ended up not being as dark as I thought. But it's still quite dark. But yeah, I enjoyed this and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. And after that, the last book I read in January was War Child by Karen Laoche, or Laoche, or Loachi, or Loache. One of those. So this is a space opera set in a war-torn galaxy where humanity is waging a never-ending war against an alien race called the Strits, and the civilians are stuck in the middle and there are pirates who are also exploiting the war for their own gain. So this follows a boy named Joss who lives on a merchant trader, and his entire family, along with all of his crew, is slaughtered by pirates, and the children are kept and sold into slavery. But the captain of the pirates decides to keep Joss for himself. So I loved this book, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and it's definitely a new favourite, and I do really want to continue to the other books set in this world. From the title and the cover of this book, you would probably assume it's mostly a war story, but I'd say first and foremost this is a story about abuse and recovering from abuse, and it's done fantastically well. The main characters are all incredible. Joss is probably one of my favourite protagonists I've ever read about. I'd say a few of the side characters were a bit one-dimensional, but really not enough to care about. The world building for the aliens is really well done, and it's fantastically realised. But the author does introduce alien words and concepts to you, and she expects you to just remember them. You're never given a refresher on what any of the alien words mean, so that's quite confusing. The writing itself is also amazing, particularly the action, because it's really frantic and confusing, and it's like, actually feels like a war zone. And then the space battles are also just incredibly cinematic. So yeah, it's an all-around incredible book. Obviously there are some warnings for child abuse, and there is a lot of implied paedophilia, and there is also a teenage character with a history of sexual abuse in this book. There may also be some on-page rape, but it's really unclear, so I would bear all of that in mind before you read it. But if you can handle all of that, then I highly recommend it, because it is an incredible book. So, I found out about this book because it was listed as LGBT on Goodreads, and while it is set in a world without homophobia, which is great, and there are a lot of queer side characters, the main character himself is not confirmed to be queer in any way. There are some hints that he might feel some things towards a few different male characters, and he could also be asexual, but it's not confirmed, so I don't think I would count it as a queer book. So if you wanted to pick it up for that reason, you're going to be disappointed. But again, it is a really great book, and I highly recommend it anyway. I haven't written reviews for either of these, but I have written some notes that I want to turn into reviews, so I'll leave both of those linked in the description. So after that, the first book I read in February was Doctor Who: Harvest of Time by Alistair Reynolds. So, there are a few different plot threads going on in this book. The Doctor and Unit investigate the mysterious destruction of an oil rig, an alien race called the Sild arrive on Earth searching for the Master, and on the planet Praxilian, the natives seek to plunder the secrets of time travel from a giant spaceship trapped in their orbit. Meanwhile, everyone at Unit is starting to forget the Master. So, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The beginning is not the best. The prologue is very overly detailed and intricately written, and it fails to create a sense of tension when things start to go wrong. And the first chapter ends with the antagonist announcing his motive to nobody for absolutely no reason, and it's totally redundant because in the next chapter he appears in, he tells another person what his motive is. So why that first chapter ended the way it did, I just don't know, and I think you could cut out the first chapter completely, or at least end it differently, and the plot of the book would be completely unaffected. So I didn't like that aspect of it. But other than that, the characters are really well written. The original character for this book is really important to the plot in like every way, and she gets so much great development, so that's really cool. The aliens in this book, the Sild, are creepy as hell, and their concept is really disturbing, and the way they're written is just disgusting and really creepy. And the Doctor has such a hatred for them that is just really weird to read. So that's really great as well. And it also gives a bit of backstory on the Doctor and the Master, so that's pretty cool as well. But I will say that this book also does something that very nearly ruins the entire character of the Master, and I hate it a lot. but the plot of this book is just ingenious. The way it resolves is really tense and has a real sense of danger, and it's just incredible. I've written some notes on this book that I want to turn into a review, so I'll leave those linked in the description. And after that, I read Guardian by Alex London. So this is the sequel to Proxy, and it is the conclusion of that duology. Sort of. So obviously I can't say too much about this one without spoiling Proxy, but I will say that when I first read Proxy, I thought it was a perfect standalone, but this book makes it obvious that the intention was always to be the perfect duology. So while the first book is a criticism on corporatism and capitalism and consumerism, this book is a criticism on communism and asceticism. So I really respect Alex London for critiquing two completely opposing ideologies in one series. Other than that, I think the development for the main characters was really great. The romance was decent, but I'm not super invested in it. And while I said this book is a criticism of communism and asceticism, it kind of loses that about halfway through, and that's definitely to its detriment. The antagonist is super bland and really doesn't make any sense. So that was quite disappointing. But it's also a commentary on how the world keeps moving forwards and you can't go back, and that aspect of it is written really well as well. So I really enjoyed this and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And after that I read a short story, which was Daydreamer by Alex London. And Daydreamer is a sort of epilogue to the Proxy duology. I thought it was good and wrapped up the story well. So it does a really good job of showing how things have changed since the end of Guardian, and it also gives a lot of backstory for Liam, and it makes him a much more understandable character. And the romance is quite cute, and it has quite a lot of emotional moments for a short story. There were a lot of typos, though. I can't complain too much because the story was free, but it is really distracting, and you'd think an author would have a lot more care for their work, even if they weren't selling it, but overall I really enjoyed it, and I also gave Daydreamer a 4 out of 5 stars. And after that I read Tapestry by Halle Burton. So this is set in a world that was almost torn apart by civil war, and the people who stopped the war decided to outlaw anything that stirred strong emotions, especially music. So this is a sort of strictly logical world, where everyone is divided into different castes based on their talents, and that creates a really terrible class divide. So this is about a boy called Tally, who is of the Guild of Designers, who befriends a very lower class and guildless person called Jonas, or Jonas. The names in here are really weird. Anyway, so he befriends this guy called Jonas, and they get hunted down by the militia after they accidentally discover music. So I enjoyed this book, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. There is a prologue in this book, which is not a prologue at all, but is just an uninterrupted rundown of the lore of the world, and that's really not good, and that should have been worked into the story properly. At first, the dialogue is really stilted and awkward, but I might say that that was on purpose, because obviously it's set in this world where showing emotion in public is forbidden. So that might have been intentional, but it also might not. The characters and plot were decent, and the romance was quite sweet, and that's really all I have to say about it. The latter half of the book does become sort of weirdly religious in a sort of hippie, one with nature kind of way. And that's not a criticism, I just wasn't expecting it. I have written some notes for this book that I want to turn into a review, so I'll leave those linked in the description. And finally, the last book I read in February was Teeth by Hannah Moskowitz. So this is about a boy called Rudy, whose younger brother has cystic fibrosis, and as a last resort, their entire family moves to a remote island where there are magic fish, which are said to cure any illness, and dramatically increase people's lifespans. And on the island, Rudy meets a fish boy, and his world gets turned upside down. So this is a really difficult book to talk about. I gave it 4.5 stars, but I'm not sure if I loved it or if I was just reading it in horrified fascination, because this is probably the most disturbing book I've ever read, and I'm gonna give content warnings for rape, and just so much rape, and also torture and non-graphically described bestiality. This is probably one of my new favourite books, but I would never recommend it to anyone, because it's just so bleak and depressing and disturbing. But the relationship between Rudy and Teeth is the heart of this book, and it is really well written, and it's at times sweet and at other times toxic as hell. And I can't really say anything else about it, you kind of just have to experience it for yourself. So if you can handle those themes, I would say check it out and tell me what you thought of it, because I'm very curious. This has loads of different themes. There's themes about responsibility and freedom and loneliness and family ties and what family means. This was a very deep and complex book, and I am very impressed by it. I thought I would give it 5 stars when I read the first 2 paragraphs out loud to myself, because they really set the tone for the book. At night, the ocean is so loud and so close that I lie awake, sure it's going to beat against the house's supports until we all crumble onto the rocks and break into pieces. Our house is creaky, grey, weather-stained. It's probably held a dozen desperate families who found their cure and left before we'd even heard about this island. We are a groan away from a watery death, and we'll all drown without waking up, because we're so used to sleeping through unrelenting noise. The tone doesn't get any lighter than that. So yeah, overall, I'm not sure how I felt about this book, but I gave it 4.5 stars, and it's a new favourite. And I have written a full review, which I will leave linked in the description. So that was every book I've read so far this year. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to hear what you thought about them, especially Teeth, because what even is it? So please leave any thoughts about that in the comments. And also tell me what are some books that you've read recently that you really enjoyed. Follow me on Twitter or add me as a friend on Goodreads if you feel like it, and I will hopefully have another video up soon. But until then, thank you for watching. I have been Isaac, and this has been Books with Ike. Goodbye.